Welcome back to Environmental Ethics. I'm Tom, and this video is discussing Paul Taylor's The Ethics of a Respect for Nature. In this article, Taylor uses a deontological framework to give us the basis of an environmental ethic. He's largely drawing from a broadly Kantian kind of picture where we view nature as having intrinsic value. And this picture is what you'd call a biocentric view as opposed to an anthropocentric view, even though Kantian ethics are very much an anthropocentric ethical framework. So before we start with the article, there's 2 points I like to kind of point out when it comes to Kant. First, that when Kant talks about a goodwill, he says goodwill is the only thing that's good without qualification. He's not thinking about this as mere intentions, right? For him, a goodwill is the actual having a respect for the moral law and really doing everything in your power to act in accordance with it, out of respect for that moral law. So it's not just knowing the right thing to do and kind of hoping that you could be more honest or wishing that you wouldn't steal. It's actually doing everything you can. So it's really, he says it's the summoning of the entirety of the will, right? So it's not merely a theoretical position in that way. So that respect for the moral law entails that a person is going to try everything they can to act in accordance with that moral law. And second, we talked about mostly what you call perfect duties, things like not stealing, not lying, so on. But there are all kinds of imperfect duties, and duties one has to kind of promote one's ability to act in accordance with the moral law. So for Kant, we have a duty to facilitate our skills, our talents and abilities, being something like, being a very talented person and not pursuing those talents for Kant is immoral, although it's not a perfect duty. And so all of this kind of pushes us more in a kind of virtue ethics space. And the reason why I mention this is because this really coordinates with Taylor's view, where respect for nature is going to entail certain obligations and habits. And so one thing I like to say to emphasize what Kant's got going on here is that, being a deontologist is oftentimes taken to be very cold. There's no exceptions to these rules. But someone who lives that way lives a very principled way, and they are oftentimes someone that we would consider to be very moral. The example I always like to give is, who would you rather have pick you up from the airport, a consequentialist or a deontologist? And everyone always answers a deontologist, because consequentialist might not show up if there's something better or that can facilitate more good for them or for other people. Whereas a deontologist, if they say they're going to show up at 1:30, they're going to be there, right? A deontologist is oftentimes a very nice person to hang out with because they say what they do and they do what they say, and they're going to be honest with you, and they're going to respect your autonomy and all those kinds of things. So it's worth it to think about what being a deontologist looks like in real life, right? Not just when it comes to a trolley problem or something like that. So Taylor starts off by making a contrast with anthropocentrism. As I mentioned, Taylor's view, this respect for nature, is viewing nature as having value in and of itself, and it is a biocentric view. He's going to say that all living things are worthy of respect, and that is in virtue of them being a living thing and nothing else, right? Not irrespective of any kind of consequences or their role or their benefits or anything like this, right? So his concern for living things is for their own sake. And this leads us to the next point, which is talking about what he says is the good of a living thing. So when he's talking about, if you're really going to move away from an anthropocentric view, you need to start thinking about what is valuable to a living thing in and of itself. So what is good for the tree rather than what I think is good for the tree. What is good for my dog rather than what I want my dog to do, right? So, for example, training the dog to sit and roll over might not really be in the dog's best interest, right? And what's good for living things is going to be specific to its species, right? So what's good for a tree is not good for a human, but that's also not what's good for a fish or for a bobcat or so on and so forth. So each living thing has got its own kind of parameters of what facilitates its life processes and what kinds of things hinder its life processes. And so Taylor's kind of encouraging us to tune into this, to have this biocentric view. And he also talks about intrinsic value. As we mentioned, it's very simple for him and straightforward that anything that's living has value in and of itself simply in virtue of it being a living thing. So when he talks about respect for nature, the way in which he's kind of painting this is that it entails kind of three dispositions. He says that respect for nature is an ultimate commitment. And this means that it doesn't derive from any higher principle or something like this. So for Kant, the categorical imperative is the ultimate principle, and then all the other principles kind of get their value from their accordance with that categorical imperative. But for Taylor, he's saying that this respect for nature is an absolute in and of itself. It doesn't require anything else to give it value or moral force. And he thinks that this genuine commitment will entail three dispositions. The first is that disposition to bring about the good of natural beings, right? So that means that we're going to facilitate, what's good for a plant or for an animal or for a field or forest or something like this. We have a disposition to actually do those things, to actually water the plant, to actually feed the dog, so on and so forth. Second, a disposition to treat acts along these lines as obligatory. One can feed the dog or water a plant because it feels good or it's nice or it's a hobby or something like this, right? And he thinks that falls a little bit short of what he's talking about. He thinks that the reason why we should, for example, feed the dog is because it's deserving of food, right? The reason why we should water the plant is because it deserves water and for no other reason. It doesn't matter if we like it or if we don't like it, if it's inconvenient or convenient, right? It is this kind of respect that kind of pierces through our sentiments. And third, he says, he talks about a disposition to have feelings about the states of affairs that are conducive or not conducive to the good of natural beings. This basically means that we've kind of developed a sense in which we feel better when other living things are doing well and worse when they are doing worse, right? And this is kind of part and parcel to having the right kind of sensitivity, that respect for nature is kind of anchoring our thoughts and actions in a certain way. That is basically what Taylor has. It is a positive view. It's not a very critical engagement with this. He's kind of laying it all out, and this is what a deontological framework might look like when extended to nature. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.